I declare open this public hearing of the Select Committee on Nuclear Energy for the inquiry into nuclear power generation in Australia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I now welcome Miss Patty Duran to give evidence to the... forgot one bit. This hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcript of the proceedings will be published on the committee's webpage. I now welcome Ms Duran to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity which you appear before the committee in?
My name is Patty Durand, and I am president of Cool Planet Solutions, a consultancy on energy in the state of Georgia.
Thank you. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Witnesses giving evidence from overseas should be aware that whilst they are entitled to the protections of parliamentary privilege in Australia with respect to the evidence they give, these protections may not extend to another country. Before I invite you to make a brief opening statement and then we proceed to discussions, would you please state if you are a current or former member of a political party, a union, or an investor in the renewable or nuclear industries?
No, I'm not.
Thank you. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to questions.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. I'm excited to be able to present the details around Plant Vogtle to this committee so that people can have an understanding of the truth about nuclear energy, at least how it played out in the state of Georgia. I feel somewhat responsible for the renaissance of nuclear energy worldwide because prior to the completion of Plant Vogel's 2 new reactors, there was not this rush underway to proclaim nuclear as the only solution to address climate change, at least not that I noticed. In the summer of 2023, one of the 2 new reactors was completed, Unit 3, and in April of 2024, the second reactor was completed, Unit 4, completing the project. And those 2 reactors were AP1000 Westinghouse units. They were not new technologies. They were just a new design for an old nuclear technology. And those 2 units were expected to be and budgeted at $14 billion, which was already an enormous cost for a reactor that would produce just 1,100 megawatts of energy. Together, the 2 reactors produced 2,230 megawatts, something like that. The cost overruns once they began construction were severe and immediate, and were so severe that by 2017, Westinghouse, the main contractor and designer of the AP1000s, declared bankruptcy. That gave both states, both Georgia and South Carolina, an opportunity to cancel the project. I'm not sure if the Australian Parliament is aware that there is a twin plant that was under construction at the same time Georgia's Plant Vogtle was under construction in South Carolina, a neighboring state, called Plant Summer. Both of them were AP1000s, the exact same design, the same size. They both began construction the same year in 2008. When Westinghouse declared bankruptcy, both states had the opportunity to cancel the project, and state hearings went underway for both states. But South Carolina's hearings were ahead of us. And so that state decided to cancel their plant Summer, because the cost overruns were so huge that state officials there realized that their people could not bear the cost. It was impossible. And then state officials decided to investigate what happened. Why were the costs so severe? How were they caught off guard? The state spent $8 billion on something they never got. Those investigations revealed lying and deception and illegal behavior on the parts of Westinghouse and the parts of utility officials and state officials, many of whom went to jail and many of whom have $100 million fines that are still playing out. In fact, on November 20th, just last week, the final official was sentenced to, I think it was a $5,000 fine and 1 year on probation, but others went to jail. And because there was so much deception and lying that happened with Plant Summer, the commission in Georgia decided not to cancel Plant Vogtle, I believe, of course I don't have any proof, but I believe because they did not want a similar investigation to take place in Georgia, which would also reveal the same deceptions here that took place there. So our Plant Vogtle continued despite enormous cost overruns. In 2017, when all that happened, the state decided to proceed, and they created a new budget for the 2 units, up from $14 billion originally to $21 billion. Now that's what they were going to be. In 2018, the construction continued, and cost overruns began again. And they have been enormous, impactful, and harmful to the people of Georgia. As I said, the reactors completed, the final one this year. The total cost of these 2 reactors cost $36 billion, an astonishing amount of money for one state to spend on one power plant. It is frankly ridiculous. I think it should be criminal, but it's not, because whatever the state decides is legal is legal. And so that plant raised Georgia power rates 25% alone, after years of being told that they were going to raise rates only modestly, just 3 or 4%. If that. I have a press release from 2016 where Georgia Power said these units would produce so much energy shared across all these customers that it would put downward pressure on rates, a laughable non-truth. I hear a lot of people saying that this was a an FOAK, or first of a kind, that future AP1000s would be less expensive because we've learned how to do it now. We have the design completed, and none of that is true. Nuclear energy is the only technology that has never gone down in cost. It has always gone up, unlike renewables like wind and solar, which have dropped 90% in the last 10 years, and storage, which has also dropped precipitously, and the technology's improved tremendously, and other programs that are part of the modern grid now, like virtual power plants and advanced demand response and distributed energy resource management systems, and just some more than I can even list, which would have cost a fraction of $36 billion and cost no increase for just 2,000 megawatts. I've also heard a lot of claims about the design being completed. I want to make this Parliament aware that Unit 3 has been down for a total of 7 weeks this year. 2 weeks for what we call scrams, or unexpected outages due to mechanical failures. 1 week in July on the part of a valve failure, and 1 week in September on the part of a pump failure, and then 5 weeks now, including today, including since October 15th, 5 weeks of outage for a planned refueling. And those 2 weeks, the one in July and the one in September, triggered a Nuclear Regulatory Commission review because of the extended outages in the same quarter. And Southern Nuclear has filed a letter to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which I can provide you, it is public, asking for changes to the AP1000 design, which clearly shows that design is not completed. And in fact, it is just beginning, because we don't know all the ways that these new reactors are not going to perform. But we do have a clawback in the settlement agreement where billions of dollars were added to rates, saying that if they did not perform adequately within the first year, that there could be a clawback to the billions of dollars added to the rate base. So that is likely to be something that the state of Georgia looks at in the next few months. And certainly the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is looking into these outages as well. When it comes to the claim that only nuclear can meet the need for baseload or can meet the need for climate change and carbon emissions reductions, that's just not true. What we know is that the modern grid needs flexibility now. That's how renewables work best. They are intermittent, and you can overgenerate renewables and build flexibility into the grid and meet all the need for power without using much base load at all. you've got to have flexibility for them to be built onto the grid. And there are many states in the United States that have very high levels of renewable, upwards of 60, 70%, and many countries that do too, just belying the claim that only nuclear can meet the job. Because if that's true, then why are 49 other states in the United States not building nuclear? All the clamor notwithstanding, no other state is building nuclear. Only Georgia has done it in the last 30 years. So surely we should be seeing a lot of instability on our grid from all these 49 states not building nuclear, and we don't. And also, the Department of Energy in the United States is very supportive of nuclear. I don't know where that comes from. It's very frustrating to me that the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, came to Georgia in May to do a ribbon cutting for Plant Vogtle and spent several minutes extolling how great it was without once mentioning ratepayers or rate impacts. It's like we've been disappeared. There's no talk about the impact to people's electricity bills here. And in Georgia, the disconnection rate for people unable to pay has spiked over 20% this year, now that all the Vogtle rate increases have been incorporated into our bills, up over 20% from the same time period last year. That represents tens of thousands of Georgians who are disconnected from power, causing a great deal of pain and backlash that we've seen online with tens of thousands of complaints, also to the Public Service Commission, tens of thousands of complaints, and many complaints to our state legislature, where I'm hoping that we'll see legislative changes next session when it opens in January to rein in some of the abuse that Georgia Power and the Public Service Commission allowed to take place surrounding Plant Vogtle. And I'll just end my opening comments with saying that there is, nuclear energy is big money. And where big money follows, there is corruption. And you don't have to look very far to see all the corruption around nuclear with what happened in South Carolina, what happened in Ohio and Illinois, our recent nuclear scandals, what's happened in Georgia in terms of rate increases and astounding costs. $36 billion is federal levels of money, country levels of money that should not have been spent by one state. And I remind you and everyone that Georgia is not a rich state. We are the 10th poorest state in the United States. We should not have built this plant. We're going to be paying for it for 60 years, the depreciation schedule for the reactors. So there's a lot of corruption and misbehavior. There have been a lot of documented lies that we have seen in Georgia that I'm trying to get media coverage on, but not succeeded so far. So I've just documented them myself. And I and a group of 6 organizations published a report in May called "The Truth About Plant Vogtle," where some of that misinformation has been captured. So I'll stop there and answer any questions that you have, and I hope that this testimony is helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Rand. I'm just checking. Mr. Kennedy, are you online?
Yes, I am, Chair.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. We'll start with Mr. Chester today.
Mr. O'Brien can go first.
No worries. Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Chester. Thanks very much for spending time with us today. I do appreciate it. I hear your evidence about concerns of both corruption and cost overruns. In the event that nuclear power plants could be built in the absence of corruption and in the absence of cost overruns, so on time and on budget, would you support nuclear energy?
That's a difficult question to answer because that on time, on budget framing is exactly what we heard in Georgia for years. Georgia Power claimed that Plant Vogtle would be on time and on budget because the components would be modular, they would be built off-site in a factory and then shipped to the site. And also the design was going to be completed as it went along, and everything was going to be very on time and on budget. So, I mean, I'm of the saying that fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. I'm not going to be fooled again. I don't believe on time and on budget because there has been no nuclear power generation plant built on time and on budget, except in communist countries where costs are not transparent or heavily subsidized by countries who nationalize the plants, who do not have a profit motive like the United States does, like, say, France and South Korea. Both underwrite or actually nationalize the cost of building their nuclear plants.
And
the
so,
other issue...
no, sorry, go ahead.
The only other issue to say about that is I'm not sure I would support nuclear anyway, just because it's not necessary, because the renewables are so cheap and so capable. And in fact, there is a huge amount of carbon emissions just in building the plant. In fact, for Plant Vogtle, there was so much concrete used in the cooling towers and the other components that was the equivalent of building a sidewalk from Miami, Florida to Seattle, Washington. And that information came from Georgia Power, not from me. And I don't know how much you know about concrete, but it is one of the most carbon-emitting substances on the planet. That is a huge amount of carbon.
Just so I'm clear about your view with respect to my question, you mentioned a few countries there that have delivered nuclear power plants on time and on budget. Now, you were saying, though, that even if you are able to deliver them on time and on budget, you would not support nuclear energy. Is that right?
That's right. And I'm not sure that France and South Korea did deliver theirs on time and on budget. That is not research I've done. I'm just saying that nuclear supporters make claims that those were built on budget. I don't know independently if that's true or not.
And given your comments about renewables, and you were previously saying that you don't believe that a baseload power source is necessary if you could just use renewables, do you agree that the more renewables you have on the grid, the more gas you will need to use, and gas is a fossil fuel and therefore by its nature emits more than nuclear?
No, there's no evidence that the more renewables on a grid, the more gas. That's the old school of you must have base load. If you look at grids that have high levels of renewables, they don't have more gas. In fact, Georgia has more gas on our grid. In fact, Georgia expanded gas and coal the same month they were celebrating Plant Vogtle as being the largest clean energy generator in the nation. The very same month, in April of this year, they added 6,600 megawatts of gas and coal, proving the lie that they were saying that nuclear was going to be a carbon-free, well, it is true, would emit carbon-free emissions just for the production of energy. But that does not include the total, the total production schedule of building the plant, mining the uranium, and all that goes into it.
So reflecting on those comments and also your previous comments that renewables are flexible, can you just explain to us how renewables can be flexible given they are weather dependent if they do not have assistance from complementary technologies like gas?
Sure. They can be independent a number of ways. In one way is to have wind and solar on the same grid. They produce energy at different times of the day. Another way is to overgenerate so that you have a lot of solar coming in from all over the country or in adjacent grids and wind. That's how many of the independent system operators, PJM in the Northeast, for example, and states out west have such high levels of renewables. That's also some of the ways that grid operators talk about that they can generate up to, I guess the highest I've seen is in the 90s, in the 90% of renewables on the grid with a stable grid. And then you have storage coming in to play cleanup. You've got hydro, you've got geothermal, and then you've got tons and tons of demand side management tools like virtual power plants, like demand response, and many, many more that would enable customers to be engaged in the modern grid. I ran a nonprofit for 10 years called the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative, and that's what we did. We studied what do consumers want from a modern grid. Do they want to be engaged? If so, what are their values around energy? Because prior to that organization doing the research, there was a common trope that engineers in energy would say, well, people just want the lights to come on and they want a hot shower and a cold beer, and after that, they don't care. That's not true, and our research proved it's not true. People do have values around energy. Some of them want to save money. Some of them care about carbon emissions. Others of them care about cool technologies and want to be engaged around things like demand response or other utility programs. It's really important for us in the energy industry to understand what those values are and meet those values. And those values include consumer engagement, the opposite of what a nuclear power plant does.
And in recognising that you clearly state that you have surveyed consumers' values and their wishes as part of the group you're part. I note that the Department of Energy in the United States has made it very clear since the Vogtle plants have come online that they wish to triple the capacity of nuclear energy, and that equates to around about 200 gigawatts of nuclear energy to achieve its climate targets, keep the lights on and so forth. So I'm thinking on one hand about the surveys you have done about consumers' values and how they feel about what energy they would like to use, and the analysis used by the Department of Energy in the United States, which has led to a very different conclusion about what's needed for the electricity grid. As we listen here from Australia, had quite some distance, and we weigh up the evidence from the Department of Energy in the United States and your evidence. Can you please outline to us why you think your evidence should be listened to or considered more highly than conflicting evidence from the department?
Certainly, yes. There's two things. One is the Department of Energy did what they call a liftoff report series. That liftoff report series never included demand-side management solutions, which was a stunning failure on their part. All they looked at were supply-side resources. They never looked at demand response, energy efficiency, all of the numerous ways that the peak demand could and should be reduced, and the ways that exploding energy growth could be met. And I've spoken to Jigar Shah at the Loans Program Office for the Department of Energy about this failure. He does not have an explanation for it other than to say that's an important thing to look at. It's a somewhat dismissive answer that does not make sense to me. So I don't know if there's something political going on that I don't understand. The other issue is that the Department of Energy specifically, and Jennifer Granholm, its secretary, they do not talk about the fact that, at least in the United States, nuclear energy is paid. Industrial customers that use nuclear energy for data centers, which is one of the big drivers behind this rush to nuclear now, they pay marginal rates, not base rate tariffs that residential and small businesses do. Those marginal rates that industrials pay are somewhere along the line of 4 to 5 cents per a kilowatt hour, whereas residential and businesses are paying 15 to 25 cents, 3 to 5 times higher. So I take issue with the Department of Energy's desire and advocation of nuclear because they're not talking about cost to the ratepayer. As I said earlier, Secretary Granholm came to Georgia, ate cake in the shape of Plant Vogtle. It was almost a dizzying let them eat cake moment. She's not paying a Georgia power bill. No one at the Department of Energy is paying our rates, which are now going to be the highest in the nation next year when the next rankings take place. They're eating cake in Georgia at our expense while advocating for 200 more AP1000s after these went over so much, delivered billions of dollars in profits to Georgia Power before even the first electron is generated from early on-bill tariff financing that we were forced to pay, totaling $1,000 per Georgia Power household. If you died or you moved, you paid for something you never got. And meanwhile, they don't talk about ratepayers or rate impacts at all, or disconnection rates, or energy poverty or energy burden, all of the things that we are struggling with. So until the Department of Energy, those well-paid, highly educated, affluent people can start to care about the customers of Georgia or any other state, I take issue with their recommendation. In fact, I'm offended by it. I'm offended by the fact that they show no concern about the people of Georgia or bill affordability while they're calling for an insane amount of nuclear that cannot be delivered on budget. It never has been.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Kennedy, we'll go to you.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So just to get clear, in that US Department of Energy liftoff report where they say the US capacity can triple from 100 gigawatts to 300 gigawatts to 2050, you disagree with the US Department of Energy's experts, just to be clear on that, yes?
I do, absolutely, 100%.
And when they claim nuclear has an essential role in the energy transition as a clean, firm complement to renewables, you disagree with that also, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
And this report was published 2 months ago and actually updated it after an initial draft. Did you provide your comments before this last update in September?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And I also said you read a lot of commentary. I heard you say that the Georgia plant was first of its kind and the costs will come down. And I think you said earlier in your testimony, quote, none of that is true. Is that roughly right, what you said just recently?
That is what I said. I'd like to add a little bit of context. There were several...
Can I just ask you the question and then perhaps you can create
Okay.
some... in the US Department of Energy liftoff report, they dedicate 8 pages to the Georgia plant, describing it as first of a kind, describing 25% of the costs as Georgia-specific. And in their view, they lay out all the risks that happened in that and how that could be managed in the future. So when you say none of that is true, that's another area where you're disagreeing with the experts in the US Federal Department of Energy. Is that correct? And what don't they know? What don't they know? What are the facts that they don't know in the US Department of Energy? What expertise are they lacking?
They have not talked to, as far as I know, or read the reports from the Vogtle construction monitors who were charged by the Georgia Public Service Commission to provide oversight and do semi-annual filings and of the progress of the project and provide testimony at semi-annual hearings for over 10 years, for basically since Westinghouse went bankrupt. And those reports were hardly read or looked at by anybody. And I have been in touch with those construction monitors, one of whom has agreed to write an opinion piece because their views have been subsumed by the charm of the nuclear industry that's underway. And one of them in particular, actually 2 of them, have said clearly to me, there is no way that nuclear can be built affordably, most especially the AP1000s, but certainly not the SMRs either. And they have provided details of why they think that, but it doesn't help for me to know them or for me to talk to him. It helps, it needs to be seen by the wider public. And so I have asked him to write an essay exposing his views and clarifying his knowledge because he was on the front lines. The Department of Energy was not. Jigger Shaw, Secretary Granholm, none of them have been or lived in Georgia. And I've asked them to provide me with the data that shows this cost savings because I haven't heard about it. We've had hearings twice a year, including December of 2022, when the final settlement orders were decided by the commission. There was no talk of any cost savings between the next set of reactors or even between units 3 and 4, which the Department of Energy also claims they can prove. And when I've asked for those numbers, you know what they tell me? It's a trade secret. You've got to be kidding me. That can't be, that's not acceptable that there's a trade secret for how these cost savings are supposed to take place. That needs to be public information, but it's not. So between the Vogtle construction monitors working on site, their reports have outlined what the costs are related to why the cost overruns were so severe, I don't see them reflected in the Department of Energy's report. And I know they haven't spoken to these construction monitors because I've asked them and they've told me they haven't been spoken to. Those are my reasons.
And just to be clear, your view is the nuclear scientists at the US Department of Energy are unaware of the details of the Georgia plant. Is that just to be very clear? Or you're saying, you mentioned the public, you believe the nuclear scientists at the US Department of Energy are unaware of this?
I don't know. I can't say what they're unaware of. I didn't see it reflected in the liftoff report. And I know that they are under a lot of pressure to support nuclear. It's become very political in the United States, and there's a lot of pressure to support nuclear. If they don't support nuclear, okay, I'm sure they're not sane.
Okay, so your view is political pressure rather than fact-based. Okay. Do you accept that Microsoft, Amazon and Google are directly investing their own capital to build and bring online nuclear power?
I see a lot of deception in that space with the utilities each claiming that data centers are coming to their state with overlapping claims of enormous amounts of growth that even the data center owners are undercutting by saying that's not true, we're not going to be in all these states. And then I also see the investments that these big tech companies are making do not include any sort of commitment to paying for all the capital costs. Their commitment is to buying all the energy.
But you do accept that Microsoft, Amazon and Google are directly investing collectively billions of dollars to invest in nuclear power? You do or you don't? Sorry, just to get clear.
I guess what I'm seeing them say is they are going to buy all of the power out of those nuclear plants. I think they're dancing around the fact as to who's going to pay the capital costs. I don't see that they have committed to paying the capital costs, no.
Final question, Mr. Kennedy.
Okay. I think we can table something, evidence that runs contrary. So your view is Microsoft, just to get clear on that, like Microsoft, Amazon and Google will not have economic downsides if their power plants aren't fitted. Because my understanding is that the commitments they have made are contractually binding, which is financing the construction to commence. So
financing the construction is not paying for construction.
Okay, they're financing. Well, I think it is. Financing the construction that's providing capital for construction to commence. But my specific question is, previously in your testimony you said retail people are paying marginal rates and not bearing the full cost of nuclear because it was being shared. Wouldn't you say then, given the agreements Microsoft, Amazon and Google have entered into, that they will actually be paying the full cost of what it is for those nuclear power plants given those agreements, and they are taking that risk? So my question is to you, what Microsoft, Amazon and Google don't know that you do?
That I know. You could say it. I have not seen those agreements, but all the news about those agreements, none of them have said that those entities are paying for all of the construction costs, including overrun risk. I've not seen anything like that. All I've seen are that they have agreed to buy all the output from the nuclear plants, and they get that output on marginal rates. Industrial customers get the output from nuclear or any plants on marginal rates. It's only the residential and small, medium business customers that pay base rate tariffs. So there's a lot of left out information in the articles that I've read about who's paying for what. I can't imagine any of them would say they would take on nuclear cost overrun risks. That would be shocking to me.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Chester.
Thank you for your evidence this morning. Can I just go to the question around the environmental footprint of nuclear power stations in the United States and compared to large-scale renewables? The evidence we've received from previous witnesses was having a balance of some nuclear power stations in the grid reduce the risk to overbuild the industrial scale renewables, so it reduces the need to build more solar farms and wind turbines. Do you have any comments on that at all?
You know, it seems like a ridiculous comparison when you consider that the Department of Energy is calling for 200 more AP1000s costing trillions of dollars, that we're now going to say that, oh, but renewables, we might overbuild them when they cost like a fraction. What is it, a tenth, an eighth to a tenth of the cost of a nuclear plant for the same amount of megawatts? It seems like a ridiculous comparison to me.
So just to that point, in relation to the cost, if you spread the cost of the nuclear asset over its lifespan compared to replacing the industrial scale renewables every 15 to 20 years, do you reflect on that at all, or you're just completely against any nuclear power stations?
Well, I understand that nuclear proponents claim that a nuclear plant can last 60 years, but there is no plant on Earth that is that old. The oldest one in the United States is in the 40s, and those plants have a lot of maintenance, expensive maintenance and repair requirements as they age. They're so expensive, in fact, that's why they've shut down in the United States, because when they shut down, it's because they're not competitive in a regional market where every energy source bids in competitively, and they can't compete because it's so expensive to keep them running and to keep the maintenance going and the repairs. I don't know exactly when it becomes very problematic, but if you have replaced a lot of the nuclear plant's pumps and valves and concrete and fittings and all of the metalworks and all of it, it's not competitive at all. And so, yeah, you can claim that they last 60 years, but they just don't. And they certainly don't last 80 years, unless you're just going to not include all the repairs and replacements. And then you can say they last 60 years, but they don't. That needs to be included.
Sorry, so what you're describing is the same sort of maintenance that occurs when a coal-fired power station plant goes through a shut. I mean, that's how we maintain and safely operate large-scale power plants. I'm not sure I get your point there, sorry.
You said coal, but I was speaking about nuclear. I was saying nuclear does not last 60 years, that the reactors need a tremendous amount of repair parts, and that to say that they last so much longer than renewables, because renewables last 20, is not counting the repair cost for the nuclear. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, in Australia, rooftop solar, as you're probably aware, rooftop solar is very popular. There's a high penetration in the market where families, often with some level of subsidies, have installed their own rooftop solar. But what we're seeing now is large-scale industrial renewables, whether it's solar or wind, is a contested space in a lot of regional communities which actually have to house the facilities, and contested also around the new transmission that's required. We also heard evidence last week that repurposing coal-fired power station sites as they're retired and reusing the transmission lines and the corridors, and I think the quote was, is the ideal approach in terms of balancing out our electricity grid. Do you have any thoughts on that, about reusing the coal-fired power station sites in this way and the avoided additional transmission construction and impact on regional communities?
I think that sounds good. I think the coal plants could be repurposed and those transmission lines be used. I hope it would be repurposed for renewables, because there's a lot of pushback on large-scale, utility-scale solar farms because of the vast amounts of land that needs. That's not a problem in Australia. You have a lot of land, a lot of hot sun. So I hope the coal plants could be repurposed for solar, because that is ideal given your climate and your land.
Final question, Mr. Chester.
Thanks. Just on that final point, we do have a lot of land. We don't have a lot of productive agricultural land, despite the size of our country, which is, I guess, where the contested space is when it comes to repurposing productive agricultural land for an industrial renewable solar farm or wind turbines on land that hadn't been previously cleared, is where the contest, I guess, exists. What's been the experience in the US around impact on regional communities of these larger scale renewables, and have the concerns of residents, if there are any concerns, have those concerns been heard at any time?
I've not heard such concerns, certainly not in Georgia, because in Georgia we have very low penetrations of solar. I guess we have a lot of utility scale solar, but it is not enough. It is not nearly enough. It is a tiny, tiny amount relative to the amount of electricity that we consume. And there have not been enough studies to show the impact of taking out productive farmland, agricultural land, and turning it into solar farms. There have been studies, and I haven't seen any problems in this country, which also has a lot of land, in terms of utility scale solar. So I'm not aware. I'm a news hound. I read national news on all these topics. There may be some occasional skirmishes, but I haven't seen much conflict on that space at all.
Thank you, Mr. Chester. And Dr. Ryan?
Good morning. Hi. Thank you for your testimony. I'm interested in a couple of things. The first is, perhaps, Ms. Durand, you could give us one of the reasons why people are keen on nuclear in this country is the concept that we could roll the technology out quickly, but we have no history of nuclear technology in this engagement with nuclear technology in Australia, other than a very small single nuclear medical grade reactor in New South Wales. Can you give us some insight into why there were the significant technical failures with the building of the Vogel reactors, why it took so long, and why they've proven unreliable in recent times?
Certainly, yep. The estimates we were given, the on-time and on-budget claims, the on-time part was 7 years. As you know, the project took 15 years to build. And some of the reasons for the delays included things like the components that were shipped in on railroads fell off the train in one case, causing a huge delay. Another case was that because there was so much pressure to deliver this project and it was so late, they were rushing, and the nuclear engineers were rushing. And so they did things like pressurize one of the water cooling tanks inappropriately. They rushed it, and it ended up collapsing the entire vessel. They had to start over. Others included skipping quality assurance tasks, causing all of them to have to be redone, not using IEEE electrical standards, causing them to fail. And there is a report that one of the construction monitors that I mentioned earlier wrote, where he summarized 4 main reasons for the delays and the cost overruns. I'd be happy to provide that report to you. It's very succinct. One of the other things he said in that report is that I don't know what to call them, staff or engineers, but the workers, the craft workers, as they're sometimes referred to, left components in the fields. I guess they thought it would go faster than it did, and so they bought components for the plant that they couldn't use, and they left them in the fields uncovered without a chain of custody, so that when they went to use those components, they failed at a rate of 80%, an enormously high failure rate, causing more delays and more costs. But I can send you the report that would more succinctly summarize what caused the delay. But the idea that nuclear would be delivered in any kind of fashion that is fast enough to address climate change is completely a non-starter. It cannot be. It can't even be close. A solar and wind farm can be built in a matter of years, 2, 3, 4 years. Nuclear takes at least 10, and ours took 15. 10 years of not addressing climate change is going to be the end of meeting 2 degrees Celsius, really 1.5 degrees what it needs to be for planetary warming not to be completely destructive to civilized society.
Thank you. And obviously, just to provide context, the overruns in time and money that you experienced in Georgia were in the context of a country that had experience with nuclear technology and building plants of this size and capacity.
Well, we had the best. We had Southern Nuclear. We had unlimited pockets in terms of cost. We had the Department of Energy providing a $12 billion low-interest loan. We had a state public service commission that was so supportive of nuclear energy as to be unrecognizable when you look at the hearings that we heard and the public pushback, the strong public pushback, the Public Service Commission's staff begging and urging commissioners to put cost overruns onto the utilities risk and not ratepayers risk, and so on. They had every wind at their back to make this thing work, and it still was a financial disaster and time disaster.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One last question, if I may, Chair. Can I just ask what your plans were in Georgia to deal with the waste from the plants? How that's been managed?
Yeah, it's the same everywhere. It's stored on site in water, stored underwater.
With no plan for the long-term disposal of the rods?
No, because it's an unsolvable problem, which we didn't even talk about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Ms. Mascarenhas?
All right, I'm just getting the technology to work. I'm just going to ask some almost quick, succinct questions. Before, when you were talking about Georgia rates, I just wanted to check that you were talking about electricity rates and not local council rates.
Correct. Electricity rates. Yeah, electricity rates went up 25% just for Plant Vogtle for one power. And actually, Georgia Power's share of Plant Vogtle is 45.7%. So their share of the output is 1,020 megawatts. Our rates went up 25% for 1,000 megawatts.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is extraordinary.
We use the term electricity bills, so I wanted to double check that. And so did you say that Georgia will pay the highest electricity bills in the country?
I believe they will. We're already at fifth highest. That's before Plant Vogtle increased rates 25%. So the next year in 2025, when bill rankings occur by state, I believe we'll be at number one. I can't prove it now because those rankings haven't taken place and this year hasn't closed, but I don't see how we won't be.
Do you think that this is squarely because of the nuclear power investment in your grid?
It has to be. 25% for 1,000 megawatts is stunning. It's insane.
Have you seen increases to electricity bills like that in the past?
No, it is the largest electricity rate increase in the history of Georgia, and actually it's the largest rate increase in the history of any state in the United States. I could not find anything higher than $11 billion, which is Georgia Power's share of the plant that they put into the rate base.
Can you repeat that? I just want to make sure I understand that.
Georgia Power's share of Plant Vogtle was $11.1 billion that went into the rate base. That increased rates 25%.
Right. So the highest rate of increase that you've seen in the US. So do you think that taxpayers' money should be spent for subsidising nuclear power energy?
Well, some of it already was. The Department of Energy loan, the $12 billion, is taxpayer money. That was taxpayer money sent to Georgia, and we are repaying that with a low-interest loan. I'm not sure it's being repaid at all if we're just paying interest payments on the loans. So all that is taxpayer money. Do I think this federal government taxpayers should pay for nuclear? No, I don't. I don't think so at all because there's so much more affordable choices now and so much faster. It doesn't make any sense if you were to compare costs.
Also, before you were talking about the price of nuclear and how the price has not gone down, meanwhile, renewable energy has gone down significantly. I think you said 90%. Why do you think this is the fundamental case?
Well, renewables can be brought down through technology improvements, but what technology improvements does nuclear have? You've still got to split atoms. You've got to create a whole new design with small modular reactors, and then you've got these risky little nuclear plants scattered throughout the country, and the security involved in keeping nuclear from becoming a weapon or a bomb target is tremendous. So you have a lot of costs and risks that doesn't make sense when you've got technologies that drop in price. And nuclear is not dropped in price because the technology remains the same.
Final question.
I don't know how else to put it.
I'm happy. Oh, I'll just ask one last question. So you're talking about risks. What are the risks that you see? And that's my last question.
Well, for the small modular reactors, I was mentioning risks because, for example, I have family that live in a small town in Virginia called Blacksburg or Salem, and those towns want a small modular reactor because they think it'll bring jobs or what have you. But the SMRs, although they don't exist yet, right, they're hypothetical, there isn't any, but assuming that they were to be created, they are a risk for terrorist attack or domestic violence or bombing, because nuclear is it's a nice terroristic threat. Just look at how Russia has targeted Ukraine's nuclear plants.
Thank you,
It's very risky.
Thank you, Ms Mascarenhas. Dr Molino.
Oh, thanks. Just a couple of questions. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions on the timing. So from the start of construction in 2009 to the time when it finally completed, it's a period of 15 years. But if you add before that other processes such as site selection, design, and often site-specific design, organising finance. In our case, we would have to come up with a regulatory regime. I mean, there'd potentially be years even before that you'd have to add to the whole process, wouldn't you?
Yes, you would. I believe that would add at least 2 more years, if not 4 more years. Absolutely.
So if there were difficulties with any of those processes, it could be 4 plus 15. You could be talking about 20 years until the first electrons are flowing.
That's right.
And then just in terms of the delays, you talked about a number of different elements, accidents, design issues, security issues, materials issues and others. That seems to suggest there's an inherent complexity in these projects, which makes it very difficult to contain all the moving parts and keep it precisely on time.
That is what our experience was. In fact, some of the celebrations that the Department of Energy has made on our behalf is that Plant Vogtle at one point had over 9,000 workers. And 9,000 sounds great, but we were already at full employment. Our unemployment rate in the state of Georgia is under 4%, which means employers cannot find enough workers. And the nuclear power plant requires craft skilled workers. And those people came in by the boatload, I should say busload, from unions. While I want everyone to have a livable wage, union workers are paid a very high salary. And what I've learned from the construction monitor reports and people who've called me to tell me is that there were thousands of workers stumbling over each other in each other's way because tasks weren't completed when they should have been. So different workers were brought in to take over the next set of tasks, only they didn't start. So we had thousands and thousands of workers. That's another reason it was so expensive. In fact, if you were to calculate $36 billion out by the length of time this plant took under construction, it clocked in at over $7 million a day. That's how, like 36 billion, like once you reach $1 billion, it's difficult for the human brain to grasp how much that is. It's just like a random thing in the back of your mind that you can't picture. But $36 billion is $7.5 billion a day over 15 years. It is an enormous amount of money.
And final question, and you can take aspect of this on notice if useful, but in terms of the cost blowouts, just as with the delays, I'm imagining that there were many components to the cost blowouts. What were some of the major ones?
The biggest ones were the components that were left in the field unprotected that I mentioned that had an 80% failure rate. Some of the other cost blowouts were the high levels of staff that we were suffered to pay at high union rates without them working while they waited for their turn to work for months, if not years. And then the things like the tasks having to be redone, like the quality assurance tasks that were skipped, and then the electricity tasks that were skipped. And then the other ones I've mentioned were the components that fell off the train and the blowout of the reactor coolant tank, where it collapsed on the workers. There's a lot of horror stories in these construction monitoring reports like that. It is astounding to read. It's very dismaying to read.
Thank you, Dr. Molino. Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Duran, for providing evidence today. I wanted to get my head around the Consumer Utility Council and I think it's called the Nuclear Construction Cost Recovery Tariff. Can you just talk me through what that is and how that's been applied in Georgia?
Certainly, yep. In 2010, our state legislature passed a law called CWIP, or Construction Work in Progress, which allowed the commission to pass a tariff, which gave them the authority to adopt a tariff, which would bill customers early for the plant, even though it was not done and there was no electricity being generated. So the CWIP legislation turned into the NCCR tariff. CWIP came out of the legislature, NCCR came out of the Public Service Commission. And the NCCR tariff applied on everyone's Georgia Power bill, and it ranged every year, it changed depending on how much the company had spent on construction costs that they had to finance. In some years it was as low as 3%, in other years it exceeded 10% per month on the bill, which is an enormous increase on your bill. 10% increase on your bill is a lot. And so what happened was when Georgia Power was late, what the commission should have done is stopped collection of the NCCR tariff so that they would be on the hook for their lateness and their failures, which were clearly outlined in construction monitored reports and testimony. But they didn't stop that. They continued collecting it. So there were several pretty big headlines in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, our state paper, which said that Georgia Power is profiting from delay. And in fact, they were able to collect billions of dollars, and they earned profits on those construction financing costs, sometimes as much as 13, 14%. They earned profits on that, and we paid. They earned something like $4 billion in profits from the early construction financing costs for Plant Vogtle. I hope that answered your question. Once the second unit finished, they kept that NCCR tariff line item on the bill and zeroed it out, so it showed up as zero, fooling a lot of Georgia Power customers into thinking, oh, we've paid for the plant now. It's showing zero on the NCCR tariff. They don't know what it is. But in fact, they didn't finish paying. The payments just started. They just began with our 25% rate increase, which is not displayed on the bill. So they don't know that 60 years of a 25% rate increase just began in May of this year. That's how it worked, though. They were able to continue collecting even all during the 7 years they were late delivering the project with profits.
So 25% for 60 years is the tariff.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it is stunning. I don't blame you for being speechless because I'm speechless.
Yeah, I've got one last quick question, if I can, please, Chair. I'm just interested by some of the comments around the environment stuff with what's the experience over in Georgia around excessive heat and drought reducing lakes' capacities for cooling water and adversely. I don't think this is as big an issue in Australia. I don't think our lakes freeze over, but I am interested to hear what the impacts have been around a lack of water, what that's done to power generation.
I'm glad you asked that question because I wanted to talk about it and I forgot. We have a couple of really big risks that have hardly ever been talked about, and that is the impact of climate change on nuclear power plants. You might have seen the many headlines of nuclear plants in Europe, particularly France, under their drought situation, having to shut down because they could not meet the water cooling needs. In the United States, Lake Norman is a lake in North Carolina that is the water source for, I forget the name, it's McHenry or something with an MC. Their nuclear plant was within an inch of having to shut down in 2023 due to a drought happening there. And our own nuclear plant, Plant Vogtle, is on the Chattahoochee River. The Chattahoochee has, and actually is it Chattahoochee or it's the Savannah River? I apologize. It's Savannah River. It is under a tremendous amount of stress and strain from droughts here and from excessive heat that we've had. We've broken heat records here this summer and last summer, and the plant the plant water intake has to be cool enough to cool. It can't be too hot, and so there have not been any close calls. But it is something that no one talks about. It is a risk, and it is a risk everywhere. So I feel like the state of Georgia and the Department of Energy have been irresponsible in not ordering studies or not looking at that risk, because I don't know how long and how hot of the weather does it have to be before the Savannah River is no longer cool, Plant Vogel. We're just sitting ducks waiting to find out, and that's awful. It's irresponsible. And that's my concern.
Thank you very much for that.
One point of clarity before the end, by the way.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Burnell. Deputy Chair, you have a point of clarity you'd like to bring up?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to do this quickly if I can. Just going back to your comments about how expensive electricity is in Georgia, I'm looking at a summary here. It comes from the US Department ultimately, but it's on the EIA
Could you please table
website,
it,
and I shall table it. And it talks about the average residential price being 13.7 cents. That ends in September. And as I cast my eye across other jurisdictions in the United States, in fact, Georgia seems to be far cheaper than nearly. I'm trying to find. I'm desperately, very quickly trying to find one other place where it might be cheaper.
Yep.
Louisiana looks cheaper, and Arkansas, but that's sort of it, I think.
Mr. Rand, you're okay to take
Idaho
on notice
also,
if you like as well.
So you're just saying before that's very expensive, but as I look at US data, it seems to be quite cheap. Can you just sort of explain, is that data wrong?
Absolutely, I can. Yeah. No, the data's not wrong, but the data is misleading because people pay bills, not rates. And Georgia Power's bills are 5th highest in the nation because there's a lot of tariffs, fees, and charges on the bill that is not captured in the rate. The game that Georgia Power plays is they keep all those things outside of the rates. So 15 years, the NCCR tariff that had raised bills 10% a month was not in the rates. Neither is our monthly service charge in the rates. Neither is our environmental cost construction. I could keep going. There are 3 tariffs plus the NCCR tariff not in the rates.
And yet the
title, so when you look at
the title of this table, which is 5.6.A, and I will table it myself here, and I'm sure the Secretariat can send it to you. It's entitled Average Price of Electricity to Ultimate Customers by End Use Sector, which indicates, at least by layman's reading, my end, that this is the price paid by residential customers. You're saying that wouldn't be the case?
It is not inclusive of the tariffs and the other charges.
Okay.
It's not inclusive. And I can send this committee a ranking of United States bills by state for you to see, if you would like to see how the bills compare.
Thank you, Mr. Rand. That would be great if you could supply that to us, please. And also, if you could also supply the report that you and Dr. Ryan were talking about, the cost overrun report. Sure. If you could please supply that to the Secretariat, that would be great. Thank you. Unfortunately, we've came at a time, and thank you for giving evidence today. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, including questions on notice, please forward to the Secretariat by Friday the 13th of December 2024. Please note that responses to questions on notice will be published on the website as submissions to the inquiry. You will get a copy of the transcript of your evidence to assist you in answering questions taken on notice today, and you'll have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Thank you very much, Mr. Rand, for appearing today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the committee members and witnesses for their time today. Hansard and Broadcasting for all they do, and the Secretariats for all you guys do. Thank you very much, and this public hearing is closed. If we could all please exit the room.